Have you ever asked the question, how do I know if this is God stretching me, something I'm supposed to do, or something else? Maybe I'm giving too much. Maybe I am going beyond my limits. This is a question that I've heard from people frequently, and it's one that used to rattle around in my brain quite a bit as well, because I want to grow. I want God to use me. And that's been my heart cry since I was a little girl. Yet at the same time, there was something that got kind of twisted up inside of me with unhealthy understandings about God and me and what He actually expected of me that kept me in a position to perform, to please, to keep trying to do something right and better. That is not a fun way to live. If you've been there, holler at me, put something down in the comments and let me know. Yeah, that's something that you relate to as well. We may hear the verse even about pleasing God and not man, and think in our hearts and our minds and say, yeah, that's what I want to do. I want to please God and I'm going to be doing this for God. And there's something that can shift in that good intention that becomes problematic. This focus on, I want to do all these good things and I want to serve and honor God without more perspective about what's actually happening and reality in who we are and how we show up in this world. So, limits are a huge part of that, which we're going to talk about today. Hey, Robin, I am so glad you're here. Thank you for joining me on this live meetup. We are going to be talking for a while today on this topic about limits and honoring our limits so that we can, well, hopefully, I'm hopeful that as you're listening to this today, that you'll be able to take a deep breath and that some piece of burden that doesn't belong with you, over responsibility, weight of confusion, expectations and demands that don't belong there can be lifted off, and then you can breathe and notice that that has shifted. That's my hope and prayer as you listen to these messages and take steps as a result of the messages to implement something that you're hearing in your life and see what it's like to have a different experience, see what might happen. Even if all that is writing down something that stood out to you, doesn't quite make sense, and maybe bringing that before God, just saying, hey, show me a little bit more of this. Help me understand what your message for me is in this. I am going to be talking about limits from a perspective that is very familiar for me. And God is continually teaching me more and more and more about limits and capacity. There are signs that we can look for that help us know we're either reaching the edge of our limits, and there's more definitive signs that are easier to identify when we've gone beyond a limit. And when I think of limits in the context of our like if you're stretching yourself beyond your limits, I think of the farthest edge that if you hit that limit becomes the catalyst to something significantly different. So let's say, somebody who isn't eating for a long period of time, there are gradual changes, gradual changes. There's going to be a limit where organs stop functioning, which is very sad to think about. But as someone who has had an eating disorder in the past and works with clients with eating disorders, that's a reality too. That when we starve ourselves, we don't have what we need in our bodies. And eventually, if the limit is actually reached, then things are shutting down. And that is not where we want to go. The goal is not to get all the way to the far end of the limit, but to identify when we're going towards that place where it's becoming problematic. And it's not easy to always know. There's a lot of nuance in what's happening inside of us, in signs that we can take a look at, etc. Personally, when we were at the ranch and fostering, I hit my limit and still felt like I had more and more that I could give, more that I could do, internal motivation and drive for things to be different, etc. But I was not functioning well. I couldn't hardly get off the couch or the chair. I would wake up many hours later than I would normally do and move into a chair and sit there for a long period of time, try to read a book. Couldn't really, it took me a very long time to get through any books. Try to write, took me a long time to form words, make complete sentences. My brain was not able to do what I wanted it to do. I'd poured out so much and depleted so much of my own reserves and gone well beyond capacity to a place where I was now experiencing significant depression, the signs of post traumatic. I'm a therapist. I can't even say this at the moment. PTSD, but trauma signs that were so prevalent inside my body and affecting my brain and my overall capacity. After that, I've resolved that I never, ever, ever, ever want to reach that point again. And God had revealed ways that I had gotten into that position because there was a mix of things. We really felt like God was leading us to serve. And at the same time, there were a lot of messages in the background of if you do this and if you give this much of yourself, you're serving really well, really good. And God's going to be so pleased with you. And I wanted that pleasure of God, longed for it, wasn't fully receiving what was already there for me. Oh, I just noticed my audio changed, so I'm going to change my microphone here real quick. Go back and Q9U. Hopefully that is working good. Okay, so sorry about that. Just changing the microphone. I would love to hear if you're still here, Robin, or anybody else that's here listening. What have you noticed in your life as far as signs that you're reaching that limit edge or that you're really stretched beyond your capacity already? Have you hit a time? Have you hit that point in time where you just couldn't anymore? You couldn't do what other people expected of you. You couldn't do what you committed to doing. You just weren't able to. And by golly, you tried. So many of us will try and try and try and try. Yes, Autumn says, I can relate, been there too. I think that this is something a lot of Christians experience, even though we want so much to experience what our brain says about knowing rest in God and being able to find that peace, etc. But there is a striving, and there's reasons for it. As a therapist, have learned so much more about the nervous system than I was studying all this before I even went to school. But the way that our nervous system is designed and the way that our brain is designed, look at that and how it plays out in childhood development, for example, and the reactions in very high stress situations, how that impacts us physically, emotionally, mentally. It makes a lot of sense that some of us would feel this inner drive to please and to appease others, to consistently try to do something better to get out of what we know. There are patterns that have been in place for, it could be a variety of different reasons. I'm not going to get into that because that will get me way off track today, but they impact well, let me put it this way. They impact our capacity to take in the good, to receive, to see things differently. And at the same time, there are ways that we can shift it and move into a different space where our capacity is increased. So I'm going to explain capacity here in just a little bit. I want to go back to the comments. Major depressive episode, reaching limits and couldn't function and losing hope. Yeah, I have a feeling you are not alone in that. Moving a year ago, yes, moving is physical and mentally absolutely exhausting. We moved a year and a half ago and downsized after 27 years. It's a lot. All those decisions that you have to make. And The depressive episodes, like for me, it was after trauma and stress and so much that I was experiencing. And sometimes that disrupts the chemical imbalance. Sometimes there's just a chemical imbalance for different reasons. I'd also had depression before I ended up in the hospital for an eating disorder many years ago. Um, many years ago. So, I wanted to talk a little bit about the signs of reaching or living beyond your limits, like really getting, I say living beyond, but I really want to identify that there is a breaking point that all of us have. And there's layers of that breaking point. I mean, if I really think of it as a breaking, there could be just the whole mental breakdown completely, but there are layers of that. And there's a whole realm that we are not going to function well in. And it's not a place that God would want us to be in. God does stretch us, He does grow us, and the result is closeness to Him. It's increased capacity, which I'll define here in a little bit again. Um, yes, oh, okay, Jessica also recognizes shutting down and having issues from that. I'm just taking a deep breath because I want to honor each of your stories, each of you who have experienced that point where you just realized or were at a place where you didn't even know what's going on. I'm beyond exhausted. I am beyond. How did I get here? What do I do now? And we'll talk about some of that towards a little bit later in the video. Let's take a moment right now and think through some of the signs that I wanted to offer today and use this as an opportunity to check in with ourselves. Is this something that's happening to me now? And maybe I haven't been aware of it, or maybe the spirit's been nudging me and I'm trying to not pay attention to it, or someone else is saying something to me, and there are signs that are happening. So we're going to pause as I share some of these signs. You notice a significant change in your attitude. Maybe you're more cranky. You have a sharpness in your voice or an edge, or you're feeling more defeated, and that hopelessness feeling is settling in. Maybe it's familiar because you've been there before, and so it doesn't seem alarming because it's just something you know. Is it happening now? Are you having difficulty in regulating and navigating emotions? Do you become emotionally distressed more easily, more intensely? For example, uh, as a mom, kids that are always tapping on you or want to know something, they're asking questions. If I have high capacity, I can see, I can recognize they're asking a question, or maybe they say something, they don't really mean it. If it, sometimes they can say things that are a little off or mean if they're being really direct, but it's not personal, etc. I can understand more of where the child is coming from and what they need and how I can show up for them. When I don't have capacity, for whatever reason, I'm going to be sharp with them. I'm going to be irritated as all get out. I might, snap. I might take a deep breath and have a heavy sigh and say, oh my gosh, or at least think it in the back of my mind if it doesn't come out. I mean, because I don't want to talk to my kids bad, but these are things that are happening. When I'm paying attention, I'm noticing things that are shifting. I have less capacity to respond well, to show up well. Another sign may be that I'm continually making decisions. And this is just kind of can be a pattern in our lives, but it can shift a little bit and escalate. Am I making more and more decisions that I don't want to make because I'm tired? And so I'm giving up and I'm just saying, whatever, I don't care, do all this or don't do any of that. Like it becomes all or nothing. Or I just say, whatever you choose, I can't decide. That can be a sign that you're stretched beyond where you need to be in that moment. Do you notice yourself giving in or giving up more easily? Kind of like what I just talked about, where it's easier to just say, I don't know, I give up, or I just give in to whatever you want. Is that happening? If that's already a pattern in your life, is it happening more frequently? Is it something that is so common that you're not even aware of it anymore? Another sign can be not caring about things you used to care about, things you used to enjoy. Maybe at the holiday time, you used to care about decorating the house and you just don't even want anything up. You don't even care if the house is decorated this year. You're kind of giving up on Christmas decorations, and it used to be something that you really enjoyed doing. That could be a sign. There's lots of other reasons that these things could be related to, but we're checking in with ourselves and asking God to reveal, is something going on with me right now where I'm starting to go beyond my limits? And the limits need to be identified as well. So let me talk about capacity a little bit. In my newsletter that I sent out, albeit too late because I thought I sent it and I didn't. So I sent it a few minutes before I went live today. Sorry about that, everybody. But in the newsletter, the way that I phrase capacity is a set of skills, resources, and capabilities that are available and accessible to you at any given moment. Our capacity, our ability to access things that we even have internally changes based on different things, different factors. Um, so Autumn says early morning anxiety, brain fog, and procrastination. Yeah, noticing those. I'm guessing that that's something that you're noticing right now, that procrastination. And so as I'm speaking, the capacity that I'm mentioning, like I said, there could be other things that tie into this capacity and limits, all kinds of external circumstances, but they affect the limits that we have, right? So our physical health is one of the things that is our capacity. How healthy are we physically? Can we run and climb a mountain? Or is our physical capacity, the capability at the pace of walking down the block slowly? There's a difference. Physically, that's one realm of our capacity. We maybe have the muscles trained for certain physical things that we do. We have the energy levels to do it, the motivation, all of that kind of plays a part in the physical capabilities. So my limits, when I walk 4 miles is a lot for me right now. I could push myself and do more. But when I did almost I think it was over 4 miles in Utah, crossing a creek and going up and down, I was pretty exhausted. That was a good sign of about how far I could go at this time. Training could make a difference. Maybe I don't remember what I was eating at that time, but I know we had donuts that morning because it was National Donut Day and my husband's friend actually owned a donut shop. So we don't do donuts very often, but in any case, the idea of where you are is where you are. The capacity you have today is the capacity you have today. As frustrating as that can be, it is where you are. One of the things that I started with in the Habit Room, which is a beta group that I'm doing right now, it's a 12-week group that we're doing to work through identify habits and goals, but not and shift the focus from being this is the year that we're going to suddenly do all these things differently to engaging into the process of habits and goals and what's happening when we set habits and goals. So one of the things that honestly it came to me just I really feel like this was a God-led thing that because it came to me as I was saying it. It wasn't something I had planned for at all. But inviting each of us in the group, and so I'm going to provide this invitation to you now as well, to honor yourself as you are today and as you show up today. Today is not yesterday. Today is not 10 years ago. Today is not 5 years in advance. It is today. Setting an intention to honor who you are and how you show up today, and that it will not be staying that way. As we lean into processes with God, we have opportunities to experience new things, to incapacity where needed, to take care of ourselves when we're beyond capacity so that we have capacity to do the things that matter. Um, so indecisiveness, Autumn had said, indecisiveness is definitely can be a challenge for a lot of us. I have a strong difficulty with making decisions sometimes, and that has been very frustrating, but it's energy depleting as well to stay in that indecisive place. So that's actually one of my habits is building a skill set inside to make some decisions quicker, um, to have that habit and just kind of not think about it, even not to even go through all the possibilities, but simply just to make the decision and live with the outcome. Not in a giving up fashion, but in the scenarios where it's really kind of a more simple process. That's just a side note. So we talked about some signs of reaching or living beyond your limits, that change in attitude, difficulty with emotions, or even like a nervous system reaction to things that other people say or do. You notice yourself kind of starting to be feeling really judgmental and making a lot of thoughts about them or about yourself, or somebody, like a sound happens and all of a sudden you're just like, you tense up, stress, capacities. That's a sign that your nervous system is overly engaged. So going back to what capacities we have, I talked a little bit about physical capacities. We also have the emotional and the nervous system capacity, which is what I was just talking about. When you have these physical responses, you may not know why they're there, and that's okay. We don't always have to know why. The what I guide people in is the noticing process, the awareness that it's happening, connecting to it happening, so that you can move from that awareness, acknowledging that it's maybe happening frequently, so that you can move into attending to it. What needs attending? Is it because I've been running too long and my physical body is just doesn't have the capacity anymore, or because I have made more and more and more decisions and saying yes when I really didn't want to, and now I'm so irritated because I feel trapped and I need to shift some things up. I need to say no to some things. I need to set limits, that type of thing. That's part of this growth path that I teach in the growth community for Cultivate Together. So the physical, emotional, that nervous system response can continue to build over our lifetime. When I meet with clients and several people that I talk to, they're starting to recognize that their nervous system has been on high gear pretty much their whole life. Hypervigilant. What's coming next? What might happen next? What do I need to manage? And that is exhausting. If that is you, I want to say a caveat right now that I um, hope that you would get some additional support, therapeutic support. I definitely recommend things like EMDR, even somatic experiencing, um, EFID, some other therapy options that are out there to help your nervous system settle down and for the brain to release the stuff that's stuck in there so that you have more capacity to do the things you want to do. When those thoughts come, the shame-filled thoughts, the negative talk, these therapeutic processes help to shift things internally to be able to manage it when as needed, but also to reduce the frequency intensity of those thoughts even happening in the first place. Another set of capacity, again, being a set of skills, resources, and capabilities available and accessible at any given moment, is finances. I hear so many people say, the budget's the budget. That's what it is. You got $1 here, that's all you got. You got $1. You don't got $2, you got $1. There's very clear limits in finances. What do we have as a resource that's available to us at this given moment? Relationally, there is also, I wanted to include relational as a set of capacity or a capacity as well, because there's a principle that I talk about is in the group as well. It's what I learned through the Townsend Institute, and it's a term coined by Dr. John Townsend. If you've heard me on videos before, you might have heard me talk about it. It's also talked about in his Dr. Townsend's book, People Fuel, and the term is relational nutrients. And the way that he talks about the nutrients are the things that we get from other people that provide energy for us. They are things that God provides through people. Yes, we have access to God. God provides so much for us. And one of the ways that He provides is relationally. When we've been hurt in relationships, when we've had unsafe relationships, when we've felt unsafe in the past and our brain is having a hard time identifying what is safe and good today, it's going to impact our ability to take in
good relational nutrients, and our capacity relationally with other people is going to have limits as well. We're going to have different resources and skills of how we communicate relationally. There's a capacity. Some people do not have the capacity, either because of an unwillingness or because they just aren't able to um, respond to people in certain ways. So, you know, I just sometimes the trauma impact, for example, can so alter things that are happening in the brain and the physiology in the body that then another person doesn't have that capacity to be reciprocal in the relationship for the time being. At that time, they don't have it within them. They have a lot more of a need for others to pour into them. So that is a capacity. Another capacity is, didn't really know which term to use for this. I use the word developmental. And this is really this development of who we are and how we show up in this world, how we understand who we are in relationship to God and the world that He designed and other people around us. Developmentally, we, as babies and infants, there are different stages that we're designed to grow through and develop into the adults and the adult that is equal with other people. That is like living into God's design. But all kinds of things along our journey can impact the development of things that are designed to be developed throughout our childhood, if that makes sense. For example, I'm going to go into some other terms that Dr. Townsend and Cloud use. They use a structure called the character structure model, and you'll see it in Changes That Heal by Dr. Cloud. And the way they define character is a set of capacities needed to meet the demands of reality. And really, it's an incorporation of multiple things throughout Scripture of how God talks about how we're designed to be relational, about how truth and love work together, about being connected to one another and still being our own unique individual as part of God's design. So, when I think of developmental capacity, I'm thinking about our abilities to connect with another person and our ability to really be or like develop the fullness of God's design within us. That is a set of capacities. For example, the concept of boundaries that ties into being a very clear picture of who you are, who other people are, so that you can honor yourself and honor them. It's kind of a big picture overview. Boundaries gets into a lot of ideas for me, but initially, when I heard the word boundaries, I didn't even think I needed it. It took a long time for me to not only see that I needed it, but how to communicate them, how to live within them. Like that's something that I'm still growing in. But initially, if I didn't even think that I needed boundaries, if I had no awareness of that developmentally as who I am, I don't have the capacity yet to do well with boundaries, to say no appropriately, to to honor another person's yes or no, well, like all kinds of problems that can happen when you're not developmentally, um, when you don't have that capacity at a developmental level. Does that make sense? Sometimes I feel like I'm kind of going into these big picture ideas because I really do have a lot running through the brain at the same time. My capacity is to talk through some of these ideas and not necessarily know in advance what they're all going to be. So I do an outline. I'm doing the best I can to stick with the outline. Okay, some of the things that affect our um, understanding of limits and our awareness of our own limits or how to live within them. Sometimes like we want to live beyond our limits by saying yes to everything because we want to please other people. We can't stand their disappointment. Maybe we think that we have to do certain things. Um, so the word is expectations. That affects our capacity, affects our how we connect with limits and understand limits. Because when we believe that we just have to do XYZ, in order to get ABC, that's kind of setting us up for a problem. Because if we don't have what we need to do XYZ, we don't have the capacity for it. And ABC may not even be the outcome. And so then if we don't get the outcome that we want, if we don't have the capacity when we're starting off, our expectation leads to disappointment, feelings of defeat, frustration, more irritation, and can even keep us either more isolated, shutting down, or fighting against God and other people. There are expectations that we tend to have of ourselves, of God, and of other people. And I'm going to leave it at that for today, just as kind of a seed to say, what kind of expectations show up in your life? How do they show up? And could that be something that affects your limitations? For example, I expected or I believed that I had to respond to other people's expectations of me. In fact, what I assumed their expectations of me to be, I expected that I had to respond to that all the time and that I needed to be, I expected myself to respond with happiness and to look as if I was pleased and to be compliant, all these different things. Those expectations kept me shut down internally in more and more pain, reduced my capacity to lean into anything that was actually things that God was revealing inside of me about what He wanted from me. And it affected um, me by saying yes when I didn't want to be saying yes, or feeling more and more hurt because somebody else couldn't set a limit for me, those types of things. So those expectations help to kind of identify patterns that are happening in our lives. Robin says, yes, I said yes to volunteering with an organization a few months ago, realizing you might not have the capacity for it. Don't want to disappoint them by backing out and helping less often. That is something I think, another thing that I think a lot of you probably could relate to. If anybody else does, please go ahead and share that in the comments. Say, Robin, I relate. Um, the difficulty of facing the disappointment. We talked about this in the habit room last night, that I'm trying not to go into a big sidetrack here, but when we can learn and train ourselves what it's like to actually get through the facing of the disappointment, it can increase our capacity to say no or to backtrack and say no if we need to. So I'm just going to pause and just honor the challenge and ask for God's strength and courage in and discernment, what to say and when to say something and what that could look like. Another thing, Autumn says, Robin, I relate. Thank you for sharing that, Robin, or Autumn. I appreciate that. Um, Sometimes when we're looking at those difficult situations where maybe we've already gone beyond our limit and we need to change something, is um, hang on a second, I'm losing my train of thought. We have a tendency when we don't have the capacity inside of us, as in the skill set for communication, as in just any kind of tools and resources to help us navigate how to communicate something, like what to say, how to say it, or those types of things. When we don't have those capacities inside of us, our brain wants to just go like that, giving up or giving in before. It's a splitting of it's either all this or it's all that. Sometimes what can be helpful is exploring the possibility that there might be an alternative option. And those options, God knows, but just I'm that's kind of a seed that I'm planting as well to say, hey, there may be, it may not just be I have to backtrack all the way or I have to do all of it. Maybe there's other options where someone can come alongside and take some of the load, or somebody else wanted to do the job in the first place. There's all kinds of other things. And just considering those options sometimes can be helpful in alleviating some of the anxiety and tension in that fear of disappointment, especially when it's starting to kind of um, way down even heavier and it's starting to cycle. Just wanted to throw that out there. I don't know if that's helpful for you. Never not knowing when to say no, feeling like the expectation is always to say yes. Yeah, that is definitely, I see this trend for all of us here today, including myself, that difficulty. And if any of you know, some of my story also includes date rape, saying no, actually, but fearing being bold enough to do what I needed to do. Um, so I'm saying that to relate that it is a difficult process and there is hope. There's hope for the brain to shift, for the body to experience new things, for your heart to find new courage and strength with God. And I say that actually with a little bit of caution because for any of us who are really trying hard to do what God wants us to do, we can feel like a failure and have even more shame when we're not suddenly just rejuvenated because I know God can carry me through. Well, yes, God carries us through. What does it look like? How is He doing it for you? What that might look like, going back to these options and um, more possibilities of what that could look like, could be that an invitation to say no and to experience surviving it, making it through, and even surviving the disappointment that's so fearful that you might feel really fearful of. That could be something that God's inviting you into. I don't know. I don't know what that is. And I really believe that the Spirit is constantly revealing nuances and specific direction for each of us, that's not always really clear, but that in the process, it's always about developing us and helping us to experience more of God's design in us, because in that, we're also experiencing more of who God is and relying more on God because He is the one that is shaping. So I'm going to bring up a concept that I've talked about before. Robin, you've probably heard this from me before, and I talked about it, I think, last week too, when I talked about overwhelming stress, etc. And hopefully this is a helpful picture in the framework of when you have that question, which I started off the whole thing today with, which is, am I being stretched by God? Should I just be doing this? Hear that again? That's expectation. Should I? The shoulds, the have tos, I just need to. Sometimes those are expectations. Um, so should I just be doing this because this is what God wants of me? And or I know that I should be doing it because God says this is a good thing, so I should be doing it. But then somehow all these good things become too much because we literally cannot pray for everyone, give to everyone, provide finances for everyone. It is not possible. So there's a lot of good things that we cannot do. There are a lot of good things that are not God's things for us. So this picture has been something that there's a couple of different analogies that I like to use. One of them is the rubber band picture, which you may have heard before, that stretching of the rubber band. And if you could stretch and stretch a rubber band to a point, and it has to be stretched somewhat to have enough tension in the rubber band to hold something together. So I don't know if you do this, but playing cards, for example, you get rid of the box after you buy a deck of playing cards and you wrap it up with a bunch of rubber bands, or we play some other games that are all card-based games and wrap them up with a rubber band. The rubber band has to be tight enough to hold it together. If it's too dry, worn out, if it is too taut, too tight, it's going to snap and break, right? If it's not taut enough, if there's no tension inside of it, it is not useful. Likewise, another visual that I use is a shower curtain rod. If you have those types of, with the bathtub and the shower curtain that hangs up above it, and you have the tension rod, or you have tension rod for curtains and other places too. I don't see them used as often as anymore, but they're the kind that you twist and turn, and it has to have enough tension to hold up the curtain. With enough tension, it's doing its job. It's holding up the curtain. It's tension. With too much, the springs are going to bust and it's going to fall down. It's not going to work. Without enough tension, it's just going to go straight down. There has to be some level of tension for it to be useful. And I wanted to bring that up today in this context because going back to the splitting idea where our brains want to just kind of quickly go one direction or the other, we can become very comfortable in what we've known, even though it's unhealthy. So that discomfort in, I've always said yes and then I felt guilty about it, but I know how to deal with that part. I know how to make it through feeling guilty because I said yes too much. I don't know yet how to make it through saying no, someone actually being disappointed and maybe even angry. I don't yet know how to make it through. There's going to be a tension, there's going to be a discomfort that comes with that. There may be difficulties. You may try something different with the person and recognizing that maybe it's not even likely that they're going to respond that way, but they actually do. And that's a difficulty. It's an obstacle, it's something that comes up. The difficulty or the distress is not on its own a sign that it's not helpful or healthy. Sometimes that difficulty and that tension, that distress is simply this process that's happening, part of the change process. Your body having new experiences, your brain having new experiences, your heart having new experiences of what it's like to experience God with you in a moment. And the shame starting to surface in the presence of another person or with God, that is really powerful. The shame starting to surface and saying and having a different experience that says, wait a minute, I'm not bad just because I said no. I still hold within me God's love or somebody else who's been accepting of me. And I can remember that that good is still with me and I'm making it through. So as you're starting to identify, is this where I'm being stretched or am I going beyond my limits? One of the things we can look at is the expectations. How much is I'm putting expectations on myself. Other people are expecting it. I'm assuming these things, and those expectations are to such a degree that it's making me feel like I got a curve inside, or I got to push against, or something like it's weighing me down and affecting me in some way. Is that playing a part? Is it, or is there a difficulty and a distress that I'm feeling that may just be part of growth? Um, so that's kind of the ways that we can start to get to identify the limits and then moving through that and shifting into it. I offer different tips in the groups, and a lot of times some of the things that we're doing together seem really simple, but the breathing, the pausing, and the noticing, even as I pause and notice how sometimes when I'm talking, my pace gets really fast. I'm noticing that I'm present with you here in this moment, that we're having this shared conversation, and that there's space for your story and how stress has affected you. That pausing and that noticing uses a different part of our brain, and it's a part of the brain that's helpful for you. So that is a just a simple, powerful thing that can be helpful, even in little increments. I want to end with this idea, going back to what I said before, of this invitation to honor who you are and how you show up today in this moment, that it is what it is. So, honoring you includes the reality of who you are today and where you're at today and what's happening, the reality of the capacity limitations that you have, and the reality of what's available to you, the reality of the challenges in connecting to what's available and taking that in, and the reality of how God sees you. So that honoring recognizes the truth of where we are and the truth of that God sees more than we do, that we're in process. He is not expecting us to jump from here to perfection. Most of us know this in our minds, but it's still what we're living out. Another thing about honoring ourselves is that when we're identifying the reality, consider if there's so when I think of noticing the reality. There's like an awareness there. What is happening? What are the patterns that are showing up? What are the actual limitations and the capacities? Kind of like I said before with the dollars. If you have a dollar, you have a dollar. You don't have $2, you have a dollar. My capacities on other areas is a little bit fuzzier to identify sometimes, but as I'm aware, I'm more connected and able to identify I'm getting to a certain point. So then we step into reflection and checking in. Do I need to adjust? Would an adjustment be helpful here? So for example, um, I reached a capacity sign Saturday night. I have been working on a lot of decisions and researching information as I'm having to kind of reorganize and reset up processes, laying the foundation for several projects that I've had in mind for ages and am trying to get, and they're just constantly reaching this process stuck point. So that's required a lot of decision making. Saturday night, we're out, we're having fun, it's a Christmas party, and I'm noticing myself not having the capacity to be with people I don't know or people that I barely know, and not able to reach out the way that I normally do, or even just enjoy myself. Plus, it's cold. That's kind of decreasing my capacity as well. I didn't realize we were going to be outside, so I didn't dress for it. In any case, I'm starting to feel more and more just something. It wasn't right. And at the end, my husband was asking questions and I just started crying. And I was like, I don't have the capacity to answer another question. I don't even know. I just don't ask me any more questions. I'd reached a point. I was exhausted mentally from thinking through things, and I definitely needed a longer break. So Sunday, rest, not thinking through things, just enjoying and recouping so that I could increase the capacity to be able to start again on Monday. So that's an adjustment. Now, notice along that path, when we have all the shame and the heaviness that comes with shame, there is a tendency where we may hear these messages of, oh, you shouldn't have done that. You needed to do that. The thing is that these messages of should and just have tos, etc., on their own, they're not actually necessarily a bad thing. It's the message and meaning that's connected to it about who you are that is deeply impactful. And so, as we can just notice and look at the picture of the reality, the picture of what our limits are and what can be helpful for an adjustment, we can also practice taking a stance from a little bit of a distance without the shame messages, noticing they're there. Okay, I notice you, I see that you're coming, but right now I'm focusing on what is a helpful adjustment for me in this moment. So that is a way that we can honor ourselves and the limits that we have. And we can also honor this reality of who we are and how God sees us simply by pausing, God, asking your spirit to reveal. If there's something that you're already trying to reveal to me and I'm just not getting it, would you show that to me or help me to see it? Help me to have the courage to face the difficult thing that you may be revealing to me right now. Um, Even if it's comfort, sometimes the comfort is difficult to take in. Again, going back to that tension we can feel when things are shifting, when we're used to what has been our pattern in the past, doesn't mean the difficulty and the tension is bad. So let's go through this again. Some ways that we can learn to honor our limits and by becoming aware of what they are so that we can make decisions that affect us and provide more capacity is the way that I'm approaching this. Identifying the expectations and the effect of those expectations on you. Identifying tension. Is it beyond tension? Difficulty, like it's constantly, there's all these different things, or is it maybe a discomfort because it's new to me and because I'm not sure that I know how to make it through, and maybe I need some more experiences to help me feel less discomfort when I'm facing this difficult thing. Um, so identifying the expectations, the tension, identifying the reality. What is the truth about who you are and how you show up today, the truth about your limits as they are today. Maybe you need to eat, maybe you need a nap, maybe you need friend time, maybe you need more relational nutrients and support and encouragement. Just noticing that, asking the spirit to reveal, and being able to take a step back to reflect, to notice, and to say, you know what, here's a way that I could adjust, even if it's a small, small step. that says, maybe I'm not ready to say I can't follow through on my commitment, for example, but I need to at least acknowledge that and be honest with the person that I said yes to and say, hey, you know what? I'm recognizing that this is going to be more challenging than I thought. Or maybe you need someone to come alongside and give you additional perspectives, communication points that can give you information that helps you navigate that conversation. The last thing is just noticing patterns in your life, noticing how frequently do you say yes when you don't want to, noticing where the expectations are starting to show up. You don't have to do this all at once. This is just kind of, like I said before, the seed of an idea to bring into the awareness. Wow, this is a pattern, not for the shame perspective. Again, notice the shame is going to show up. But when we're stepping back to notice, we can notice a pattern and say, okay, I notice, and now I'm going to acknowledge that it is a pattern. It is part of the reality of what I'm experiencing. I don't like it. I don't like that I have this limitation. And the only way that I'm going to experience something better, the growth path, awareness, acknowledgement, attending, is to move to that next step, to attend to it, attend to underlying needs, attend to the things that refuel you, even if it's watching a funny movie because you need to laugh and you haven't laughed in a while, or you need to go on a bike ride or a skiing adventure, something. And someone had talked about horses the other day. Is there something that brings in some joy and helps to bring in more capacity for you so that you even have the capacity to say no if you need to? So we covered a lot. I didn't think I was going to go this long today. Have been going close to an hour, and I don't know what the live meetups are going to look like for the new year. This is the last one I'm going to do this year. I love it as an opportunity to connect with you and to be available for questions and discussions on specific topics. I may do it like twice a month next year. So if that's something that you would find valuable, please let me know. Put it in the comments, send me an email. I really appreciate your feedback. It helps me to know what's resonating, what's helpful, or even if something's kind of like, that wasn't that helpful, but it might be helpful for somebody else. I don't know. It's helpful for me to know that the way that I'm communicating something or the type of content that I'm providing, if it's helpful for you. So with that said, I look forward to connecting with you guys live again at some point next year, and I am praying for you right now. I'm going to close in prayer. Dear Lord, I thank you for each person who is watching this video, whether they are watching it live at this moment or in the future, even years from now. I don't know how long it'll be on YouTube, but you know, Lord, who they are, what they need, and the truth of their reality today. And I ask for you, your spirit, to not only be with them, because I already know that you're with them, but that your spirit touch in their spirit would be recognizable in them, and that they could take in that moment of the delight and the joy and the love that you have for them simply because you created them and you will always, always love them. I thank you that you have ways for us to increase capacity when needed and to restore the capacity that's been depleted. Thank you for being you and for being with us. In Jesus' name, amen.